I'm Fatma, a PhD student at the University of West of Scotland. I work on NLP and social media stuff. And I'm so happy to introduce Vered today. Vered Shwartz, that's how you pronounce your name?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, good. She's a postdoctoral at the Allen Institute for AI, and she does very cool research. So I will let her to take the mic from here, and she can tell us about her research. So over to you.
Thanks, Fatma. Let me share my screen. Let me know if you see the slide without the notes.
Yeah, we can see only the slides, yeah.
Great, okay. Thanks everyone for joining. So most of this talk is actually gonna be not about research, but more like a meta kind of talk about life lessons that I learned during my PhD, and which will hopefully, some of which would be reusable for others. So let me start by, well, I've already been introduced, but let me start by just telling a little bit about my background. So I'm currently a postdoc at the Allen Institute for AI, AI2, and the University of Washington. And before that, I did my PhD in Bar-Ilan University in Israel. And soon, in a few months, I'm going to be an assistant professor at the University of British Columbia. Okay, sorry. Yeah, okay, so let me start with a brief overview about my work. So my work is on common sense reasoning in NLP. And so in the last few years, NLP has been almost synonymous with language models. And I'm going to use BERT here as just an example of one language model. But in general, the way that this works, as you probably all know if you're doing NLP, is that these models are pre-trained to read a large text corpus, such as Wikipedia or the web. And then as a result, they learn about syntax, word meanings, and factual knowledge and more. And then the main paradigm in NLP is to fine-tune these models on specific downstream tasks. For example, on sentiment analysis, you can encode a text such as "the chocolate cake is amazing" and then classify it to positive or negative. And the fine-tuning step is responsible for both understanding the task and also learning to solve it. But there is some generalization issue. And so it has been shown by a line of work that supervised models tend to learn spurious correlations of the specific data sets, and rather than learning to solve the underlying task. And so a few notable examples are, first of all, from computer vision. So this image captioning model has been shown to have trouble recognizing objects when they're placed outside their typical environment. So for example, it predicts a horse standing in the grass instead of an alligator standing in the grass. And that's likely because most of the horse images appeared with, most of the images with grass as the environment appeared with horses as the animal. And similarly, in visual question answering, this model learned to associate the type of the question, such as how many questions, with the most common answer for it in the training set. So for example, answering all these questions with the number 2. And finally, this is more related to NLP. There was a few years ago, there were several papers that showed that natural language inference models tend to learn spurious correlations. So for example, this state-of-the-art model predicts that I only had a soup, but it was very filling, contradicts that I didn't eat a salad, although it should entail it. I'll give you a second to think about it. And then the reason that it happens is likely because most of the negation words appeared in contradicting hypotheses. So the bottom line is that we have models that are very good at solving the data sets they were trained for, but they don't really but don't necessarily solve the underlying tasks. And they're often right for the wrong reasons. The thing is that as long as we're using machine learning to build NLP models, then they're always going to be trained only on a sample of the situations that they may encounter in practice. And so in order to address unknown situations reasonably, they need some common sense knowledge and reasoning abilities. So a few examples, a translation system sometimes needs to infer meaning that is implicit in the source language and translate it explicitly to the target language. So here you can see an example of grass-fed yogurt, which should be translated to the equivalent of yogurt made of milk from grass-fed cows. But instead, Google Translate translated it to Hebrew to the equivalent of yogurt with grass. In reading comprehension, if you see a headline such as Stevie Wonder announces he'll be having kidney surgery during London concert, there could be two interpretations for this headline, but using our common sense knowledge and reasoning abilities, we can conclude that or eliminate the interpretation that Stevie Wonder performs during his own surgery. And perhaps more importantly, when building chatbots for giving medical advice, these chatbots need to have some kind of social norms and ethics to know better than advising a patient to kill themselves. This luckily happened not in production, but when it happened with a fake patient, but still it is pretty concerning. So it is kind of difficult to define common sense, but I'm using the working definition we had in the NLP, in the ACL tutorial we gave last year. So it is the basic level of practical knowledge and reasoning concerning everyday situations and events that are commonly shared among most people. So that includes a range of different types of common sense. For example, physical common sense, such as knowing that it's a bad idea to put your hand on top of a hot stove. Social common sense, such as knowing that it's impolite to comment on people's weight. Temporal common sense about typical times and duration of events, such as dinner, and more. So I'm not going to go into the specific details of my works, but I'm just going to mention a few lines of work that I've been working on in this area of language understanding and common sense reasoning. So one of my earlier works, this was during my PhD, was on interpreting implicit meaning in noun compounds. So for example, we know that olive oil is oil made of olives, but that baby oil is not oil made of babies, but rather oil used for babies. And although this sounds so trivial, almost silly, it's not trivial for machines because it is implicit. This is something that we just interpret based on our knowledge of the world. In a more recent paper from last year, I worked on introspective knowledge discovery. So let's use this example. Children need to eat more vegetables because they're healthy. So syntactically, the word they here can refer either to the children or the vegetables. And to determine which of these they refers to, we need to reason about some implicit knowledge in this context. So the way that I propose to address it is by generating clarification questions or follow-up questions, such as what are the properties of vegetables, and then answering it with something like vegetables are full of vitamins and they can make you healthy and so on. And this can be used to make that knowledge explicit and then maybe help determining the correct answer. And a third line of work is on reasoning, and specifically I worked on non-monotonic reasoning, which is a mode of reasoning in which you can reach some conclusion and then given additional information, you can invalidate or weaken that conclusion. I worked on several things such as abductive reasoning, counterfactual reasoning, and defeasible reasoning. For example, abductive reasoning is coming up with the most plausible explanation of incomplete observations. So for example, given the past observation that Sarah wanted to make dinner for some guests, and the future observation that she had to order pizza for her friends instead, then we can reason about what might have happened in between. And it could be something like she just realized she doesn't know how to cook. And it could be something else as well, like maybe she cooked and the food wasn't good. She found out in the last minute, so she had to have this backup plan of ordering pizza instead. And in feasible reasoning, this is, I'm going to use the famous example. So if we know that Tweety is a bird, then we can hypothesize that it's likely that Tweety flies. But if we get additional information saying that Tweety is actually a penguin, then Tweety is still a bird, but it's less likely or unlikely that Tweety flies. And in our work also last year, we also extended this, and we said we can also generate or look at a sentence that strengthens the inference. So for example, if Tweety is on a tree, then it's more likely that Tweety flies, because otherwise how would Tweety get into the tree? So this is pretty much the lines of work that I've been working on more recently, and there are multiple challenges here, but one of them is if we want to teach machines common sense reasoning, then we also need to have some kind of resource with machine readable common sense knowledge. And acquiring that resource, there are some existing resources, but they're not covering all the common sense knowledge in the world, and acquiring it is pretty challenging. So in the past, it was common to either either collect it from people or extract it from text. And then collecting from people is not really scalable, because it's impossible to manually enumerate all the common sense knowledge in the world. And it's also very costly and time consuming to try that. And then extracting it from text is, it works, but it suffers from reporting bias. That is, people tend to speak more about the exceptional than they speak about the obvious that everybody knows. And so this is reflected in the text corpus. And for example, if you look at corpus frequencies, you might learn that the absurd fact that people murder more than they breathe, just because it's more newsworthy. And then recently there's also this third approach that is becoming popular, which is to extract such knowledge from pre-trained language models. And this has mixed results, because on the one hand, these models seem to be capturing a lot of knowledge, including facts that are not explicitly mentioned in the corpus, so they can aggregate across different contexts, and this is great. But at the same time, they're not really sensitive to negation. They generate they also assign high probabilities to negated facts, such as birds cannot fly. They don't really differentiate constant facts, such as zebras are black and white, from contingent facts, such as the color of my shirt. I notice I always give this slide when I'm wearing either a black or a white shirt. I should probably change it. And also, last year in our EM/NLP paper, we also showed that these models tend to memorize facts pertaining to named entities and then use them even when they're uncalled for. So for example, if you give GPT-2 the prefix Richard has a bed, then it generates something like habit of saying things that are not true. And this is okay. And then also, if you look at the attention weights, you can see that most of the attention goes to the word bad. And this is pretty reasonable in this very short prefix. But then if you replace Richard by Donald, then you end up getting something like reputation for being a racist. And again, looking at the attention weights, you can see that now the attention is equally divided by Donald and bad. And this is an undesirable behavior for most applications, because nobody actually said that it's Donald Trump or it's kind of deviating from the or assuming things that it shouldn't be assuming. And also, we also showed that language models don't completely overcome reporting bias. So it is true that they're capable of assigning non-zero probability to very trivial facts that might not be mentioned often in the text. But at the same time, they also amplify the likelihood of very rare and sensational events. And here's an example. This is a prompt to GPT-2. The man turned on the faucet as a result, and then GPT-2 says, the man's blood was sprayed everywhere. And this is not uncommon. It happens every once in a few times you generate text. And so in the future, rather than learning common sense knowledge only from text, it is beneficial to also learn it from additional modalities such as images and videos. They often provide complementary knowledge that is unlikely to be discussed in text. So for example, looking at enough class photos, you might learn that the kids in the first row are typically sitting, but those in the last row would typically be standing. And you need to be cautious about other types of reporting bias. You might learn from these modalities. For example, learning from the movies, you might learn that people typically hang up the phone without saying goodbye. Okay, so that's it about my research. Before I move on to the main part of the talk, does anyone want to ask questions?
I actually have a question. I'm not sure if you said that and I missed that part or not. But do you think reasoning can be used to enhance some of the NLP problems like rumor detection or emotion detection or something like that?
Definitely. Thanks for asking that. Yeah, I had it in a different slide deck. I don't have it here, but I think that specifically counterfactual reasoning can help with that. For example, I'm not sure about rumor detection, but I did think about how it can be used for false news, like fake news or misinformation detection. Because if you have some fact and you want to know if it's true or not, then you can think, like, let's say you have some claim X, and if you can show that if X would have been true, then that would mean that Y is also true, and you know that Y isn't true, and that's a way to prove that it's a fake or false claim. And yeah, there are other applications in which these non-monotonic reasoning abilities could be used, like real-time summarization of an unfolding event. You can update your beliefs when you get new information. And I had some other examples I don't remember right now, but yeah, I think it's really useful. It just hasn't been, people worked on that in classical AI, but it was kind of forgotten almost completely in modern NLP. And I do think we need to go back to looking at these problems.
Yeah, it actually sounds very interesting. And I think with transfer learning or multitask learning, we can enhance like current problems in NLP with reasoning.
Yeah, definitely.
Thanks for answering the question.
Thanks.
Yeah, I will leave the space for anyone else who has a question.
Okay. Okay. If there are no questions about this part, then I'm going to move to the main part of the talk, and this is about life lessons for PhD students in NLP. And so I have to start with saying that this is about my personal experience, and obviously not everything is going to be useful for everyone. So take whatever you want from it. So my first tip would be to be yourself, to not to work on what everyone else is working on, and that's mainly for two reasons. One of them is just less interesting to work on what everybody else is doing, and the other one is just that if you choose to go through this route, you're gonna live under constant fear of being scooped, because everybody is working on if everybody is working on the same task, then it means that it's likely that someone will publish before you do. And so I'm not saying you should work on a completely niche topic that nobody cares about, but try to maybe stay away from the low-hanging fruit or things that you know that other people are working on. And this is just these are just screenshots from, one of them is from Mark Ray's blog, and the other one is from the ACL blog from last year about the more popular topics right now. So again, I'm not saying stay away completely from the popular tracks in ACL, but try not to do what everyone else is currently doing. And yeah, this is another example for the lack of originality sometimes in the community. So if you search Google Scholar for paper titles with "something is all you need," you're going to find dozens of them, or I don't know, maybe even more, from after the "Attention is all you need" paper in 2017. I actually sometimes like having this like follow-up papers with similar titles, but when it's so many papers, it gets tiring. So questions to ask yourself is what could be your unique contribution, and generally just what kind of problems interest you. And I think we're lucky in our field to be able to um, borrow problems from the real world, things that we, but problems that something that we actually need in our everyday life. So try to think what kind of problem would be interesting to work on, and maybe stay away from what's popular. And then also choose your problems carefully. So conference deadlines are, for better and worse, and for worse, they encourage us to work on smaller goals. So you should be pretty cautious here, because on the one hand, you don't want to work on too many low-hanging fruit and do all this incremental work. But on the other hand, and also, yeah, don't submit half-baked work. And this is not from a point of view of an author of a paper, but I'm saying it from the point of view of a reviewer, because, and maybe some of you are also reviewers, and you know that it's pretty annoying to review a paper that is clearly not ready, and that the authors submitted it just because it's the it was they didn't finish it before the deadline. And there are always more deadlines. Try to finish your work, submit finished work. But also, looking at the other extreme, I know some students are need to hear that as well. Don't wait until you solve NLP to publish. Work on a long-term problem, but then also break it into smaller problems that you can publish intermediate results for. So this requires some kind of some time to understand how to what is the amount of work that is publishable. And this is somewhat of a cliche, but choose quality over quantity. And here, what you see, this graph here is again from Mark Ray's blog, and he's been doing this summary of or statistics about NLP papers every year. And one of these statistics is who published the most first authored papers that year. And although I'm not saying there's always a trade-off between quality or quantity, and in fact, some of these very productive authors are people that I know, and I really respect their work. I think they do very high quality work. But for most of us, it's pretty difficult to optimize both quality and quantity. So I think after a certain threshold of number of papers that you have, it doesn't really matter if you have more papers. It matters more that these papers are going to be of high quality. And I think it's true also when you're looking for a job. I think, yeah, it's like having a very few papers is not good, but once you have enough, and I don't know exactly what that number is, but once you have enough, it's better to have very good papers than to have many mediocre papers. Don't reinvent the wheel. This is something that I keep saying to students. So I came across this saying last year, reading rots the mind. I think I heard it in a talk in AAAI last year. And I strongly disagree with this saying. And I think that actually reading saves you time and heartbreak. And let me explain. And so most of us are not creative geniuses. And if you work on an idea and you don't know the literature, then you're more likely to reinvent ideas that have been already published, which is the best case, or in the worst case, that have failed in the past, or that are impossible. And so I do think it's a good idea to do a thorough literature review pretty early on in a project, not waiting for the paper writing for the few days before the deadline, and try to figure out what are the gaps in the existing work. Sometimes I think I get new ideas from reading the literature and either seeing something that people mention that is the limitation with the current models, or maybe reading an older paper that suggested some idea, but it technically didn't work. And maybe I think that today we have better tools and maybe it's worth repeating that experiment. So I do think it's a good idea. Again, at the same time, looking at the other extreme, don't be, I don't think it's a good idea to read every paper that comes up on arXiv, because you're just going to be reading papers all the time and instead of doing any kind of other research work. So I think you should stay focused and read more narrowly in your area than widely. Again, with exceptions, I do like sometimes to, when I'm working on a specific topic, I like to sometimes look for papers in other fields talking about something similar and getting some ideas on how this is treated in other fields. But in general, try to stay focused on your area. This one is a difficult one. I know for many students. It was for me as a new student. So don't overwork. Work is important, but your personal life is also important. And so I think it's important to set work time boundaries and to exceed them only on special occasions like deadlines. Also, you don't have to, like if you finished your paper a few days before the deadline, you don't have to pull an all-nighter just because it's a deadline night. But again, you're going to have exceptions, but the rule should be generally not to exceed work time. Something that helps is if you have a work email and you can disable notifications on your phone. I think that really helps. I didn't really have that because as a PhD student, I used my personal email because the university email was a typo of my maiden name that they wouldn't change, and it like was a strange email. So I just used my personal email, and then I kept getting, I got email notifications outside of working hours, and it took me quite a long time to train myself not to immediately reply to that and to be able to wait with this for the next work day. Now I do have the work email on the phone, but I don't have notifications for the work email. So I choose when to go into the inbox and check if I have emails. Do other things other than work, whatever is good for you. I find that exercising and spending time with family and friends are important, and of course, needless to say, sleeping and eating well. And it's also okay to have hobbies. You're not expected to give up on all your hobbies just because you're a PhD student. It's even okay to watch TV and to just, lie down on the couch and do nothing sometimes. Sometimes you need that. That's fine. Don't feel guilty about it. And yeah, take time off, of course. So there was recently a discussion on Twitter from some people at OpenAI that talked about work ethics and boasted about working 90 hours per week. And I want to say I was like this, probably not 90 hours because that seems crazy. But I also worked really evenings and weekends, and then that was like in first 2 years of my PhD program. And then I did an internship at Google, and it just happened that I didn't have remote access. So when I left the office, I couldn't work. And I could ask for it, but I noticed it was really nice to just have the evenings off and to have the weekends off and to travel and do stuff. And I wasn't less productive. And so once I learned that through this lack of ability to work outside working hours, I implemented that back at home, and it worked pretty well. Stop saying I didn't get any work done today. I have to remind myself that too sometimes. But many things are work. So email is work, meetings are work, teaching, writing, programming, presenting your paper, mentoring students, and yes, even looking for memes for your presentation is work. Learn to say no. This is a hard one. I think it's especially, so when you're a new PhD student, you don't have a lot of opportunities to say no to, so it's good to say yes to many things. But then once you become more senior, you're going to have a lot of opportunities and you have a limited time, so you need to learn to say no. So when talking about collaborations, one thing you want to ask yourself is, do I want to work on this project? Does it fit with my research goals? And do I have time, or am I already committed to too many other projects? And of course, it differs. It's a different question if you're trying to figure out whether to join an external collaboration, or if your advisor asks you to mentor a student, and then you have less. I mean, you don't want to say no because it's also good for you, I think. And in terms of service, I think it is important to give back to the community. So if you're submitting papers, you also need to review papers. And depending on your career goals, but I think it is also good for you to organize workshops or tutorials or in your area. But once you have too many invitations, you try to prioritize the top conferences and also maybe workshops in your specific area, and don't feel bad to decline if you're overcommitted. Think about it that way. If you just say yes to all the invitations to review, you won't be able to be as good reviewer as you would if you just agreed to review for fewer venues. And if it's difficult to say no, then look up for, you can Google helpful phrases for saying no in a polite way. This was pretty helpful for me in the beginning. Now I just copy from my previous emails about saying declining invitations. So learn to fail. This is something that I've noticed also with many students, that they tend to fall in love with their research projects. And sometimes things that just don't work. So you need to learn to recognize when an idea failed and move on. And I'm not saying move on and completely forget about it. You can keep all the work that you did on that somewhere, store it in some folder, and maybe at some point you learn new things, or there are new tools that can help you maybe complete that project. So I'm not saying completely forget it, but try to move on and to your next project. Don't be defensive against criticism. I know this is a hard one, but you probably get a lot of feedback, which sometimes feels like criticism, whether it's comments from your advisor or reviews or whatever that is. People naturally have the tendency to become defensive, and I think what I did at some point was just try to be thankful and then take whatever I want from that. So even like if you get comments from your advisor or something like that, you should be grateful for the time they took to give you feedback, but also you don't have to implement everything. It's eventually your work. So just take what you want from it. And get used to failing and recovering fast, because academia is just full of rejections. It's something that you just get used to after a while. I mean, it's still painful sometimes, but you just get used to it. Yeah, so I see that I put a bullet here of a handful of my failures. So let's think of some examples. So in my first year of PhD, I submitted a paper to ACL, and it was rejected, and then I submitted it to NLP, and it was rejected again. But I actually thought it was not a bad paper, so I submitted it to StarSem, which is it's a smaller conference, more focused on semantics, and then I got best paper. So that was a success story. On the other hand, the following year, I submitted a paper to ACL, and it was rejected, and I had one of the reviewers gave us the score of 1, which is really insulting. But then I thought about it and I said, well, it wasn't one of my good papers, and I just submitted it because there was a deadline and I wasn't ready, and I never actually submitted that paper again. Yeah, there's not really a moral for this story, but I'm just saying you're gonna get rejected many times, and that's fine. the way to maybe address this is to just try a lot more. If you try enough, eventually you're going to succeed, and then your past rejections don't really matter. And another example, more recent one, that I recently applied for jobs, and I can say it was successful because I managed to get a job. But of course, I can also look at it in a different light and say, well, most of the jobs that I applied for didn't even interview me, so that's a rejection. But again, if you try enough and you eventually succeed, then all the other rejections don't really matter. And I also recommend looking at this How I Failed series from Veronica Cipligina. I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly. So she's interviewing many successful people about their past or their failures throughout the way. You should say I don't know often. There's no shame in that. I say that a lot. You're not expected to know everything. And if you don't know something and you think you should know it, then you should ask questions, even if you think that they're basic. I can say about myself that when I started my postdoc, I started working on a slightly different topic than one I worked on previously. And there were many basic things that I didn't know. I was mostly focusing on NLP, and then I moved to an area that has a lot of overlap with broader AI, and my background in AI wasn't very strong. And so I had like very basic questions, and that could have been embarrassing for me, but then again, I learned from that. So that's what's important. Yeah, and you're going to end up knowing a lot about something that, wait, what does it say? Learn more and more about less and less until you know everything about nothing. Get out of your comfort zone. So this is different for everyone else, different for everyone. It's like a very individual thing. But one thing I think that's common for many people is that it's scary to give talks. I actually personally I'm generally okay with that. This specific talk is actually a bit more stressful for me because it's more like a personal talk than a research talk. But again, it's important to get out of your comfort zone. Talk to other people, whether it's in physical conferences when these happen again, or in other venues. And invite yourself to places. So I did that as an obscure first-year PhD student. I had like one publication for my master, and I had one paper under review. Nobody knew me, and I just happened to go somewhere on vacation, and through my advisor, I emailed someone in a university there, a good university, and I asked whether I can go there and give a talk in the seminar, and they said yes, and I made some connections that way, and that was really awesome. Of course, on the day itself, I was like, what am I doing? Nobody knows me. I'm talking about a paper that's not even published yet, but I mean, it was a good experience to have. And for me personally, even until today, something that's hard to do is to send some like important emails. I can spend hours trying to rephrase them and check myself and like go over it again and again. But yeah, it's part of the work, so I have to do that. Turn your weaknesses into strengths. So that's again something that's really personal, but I'm gonna give some examples of mine. So one of them is that my memory is okay. It's not really good. And so I try to compensate for that with being very organized and documenting everything. I'm also not perfect in that yet. I'm working on improving. Here's an example, something that I tweeted about, I think 2 years ago, that sometimes I Google something that I don't remember the answer to, and then I find my own answers in Quora. And I'm like, I don't know whether I should be happy that I wrote that or sad that my memory is not better and that I don't remember the answer to that. But it helps me to be organized. And here's another example. This is from just a screenshot from my Google Drive. I have this folder with a document of summaries of invited talks that I attended, a document with notes from conferences, and a document with names of people that I met during visits in universities. That's an important one because I just realized at some point I'm meeting too many people, and I kept running into people in conferences that I met in the past and I didn't remember. So that's just to save myself from embarrassments. And another one is that I sometimes read papers and I don't really understand them if they're not written simply. And that's something that I think is important to communicate science in a simple way, to reach a broader audience. And for this reason, I'm writing a blog about NLP for non-experts. This is not really a tip, but just something to be aware of. Life happens. So statistically, in a 4 or 5 or even more years of PhD program, you will experience major life events outside work. And so I personally had a health scare in my second year of PhD. I had to undergo a surgery. I was okay after that. There was not a lot of downtime, but still there were a few months before the surgery that I wasn't very focused in work, and I was really concerned. For other people who studied with me, they had all kinds of different events, like good and bad ones, like getting married, having babies, losing family members, also health issues. And of course, needless to say that those of you who are students now or experience a global pandemic, which is definitely affecting your ability to work. But what I want to say is that's okay. Take a break if you need it. Don't beat yourself up for delays in your research. This is pretty much, you have enough time. So it's pretty much given that there will be times where you find it harder to concentrate on work or you have to do other things, and that's completely fine. And oh, sorry. And yeah, I just want to say, I hope that for you, it's going to be mostly the good things. But you should take into account that these things happen. And yeah, I also want to, this is again not a tip, but I want to acknowledge that there are some privileges that I have, maybe that even if you follow all my previous advice, you might not gonna get exactly to where I got. I mean, people are different. So for me, I have to acknowledge that I have a very, very supportive partner that, I don't know, cooks for me, feeds me when I'm working hard on a deadline, and also was willing to move with me to the other side of the world for my work. Also, advisor and mentors along the way that care about me and that help me advance in my career, and talented collaborators. That's really important. My family is also supportive. So my parents are not in academia, but they always encouraged me to study scientific topics. And I think that's important. I know, especially for women, I know many that have been discouraged from studying in such areas. And for me, it was, I was always pushed to study that. So I kind of take it for granted that, yeah, of course, this is my place and I should be working on science. And also probably some of my personal character affects that. So I am very persistent, and I have what I believe to be a healthy amount of Israeli chutzpah. So I get things. If I want something, I'm not afraid to ask for it, and I usually manage to get what I want. And luck, of course, luck always plays a role. So let me sum up with asking the question, what makes a PhD successful? And so the answer is not make a huge impact on the field. The answer is graduate. Most PhDs don't make a huge impact on the field. And even if you do, it's pretty temporary because the pace of research in NLP is just so fast that whatever you achieve now is probably going to be less relevant in a few years. But what is important is for you to choose the work, to do the work that you will be proud of in a few years. And you need to love what you do, because if you don't, then you're going to suffer for it's a really long time. So you have to somehow find the things that you love to do, or if you completely don't love it, you should consider maybe not doing that. It's also fine. But it doesn't matter how much you love it, you should still have other things in your life other than research. And for those of you who are currently students, I want to remind you that getting to where you are now already required a lot of talent. And so the rest just depends on working well. And by well, I don't mean working very hard or working many hours. I just mean find out what works for you. Like I found out what worked for me. And it also requires a lot of luck. So wish you all good luck. And yeah, so I'm happy to take questions. I also want to mention that I will be looking for students, probably not for this year. It's too late to apply for this year. But if you want to work with me in the future, next year, if you're not students yet, then, or if you know someone that wants to do a PhD, then you should encourage them to apply to work with me. And that's it. I'm happy to take questions.
Thanks so much, Verda, for your talk. And especially thank you so much for sharing some of the setbacks that you went through during your PhD journey. I think it's very important to tell PhD students like us that it happens to even the most successful people in the field. So
it happens to everyone. Yeah.
Yeah. We have Kedma here who posted 2 questions in the chat. So the first is, yeah, now we have 3 questions. The first question is, do they give feedback when a paper is rejected? How do you improve your work and submit it to another journal or to the same journal?
Yeah, so I don't know if this, if they refers to the advisor or the reviewers, but I think that is, let's talk about the reviewers. So when my paper gets rejected, I tend to be, and I think that's very natural. I tend to be, when I first read the reviews, I tend to be, first of all, very defensive and say, oh no, the reviewer is wrong. There's nothing wrong with the paper. They didn't understand it. Sometimes it is the case because, reviewers are not always perfect. But I try to not immediately, respond to the authors if there's an author response period in the conference, or if there's a, like if it's a journal paper. I try to take some time to recover from the rejection and then get back to the review and then go over the separate points that the reviewers made and see which ones of them are actually valid and which ones of them might not be, which ones of them might not be completely true, but maybe I can somehow change something in the paper that would make it better, and which ones of them are just completely incorrect and just happened because the reviewers didn't understand, and then I can politely maybe reply to them. I do think it is important to try to change to try to use these reviews to improve the paper for the next submission. But I also acknowledge that the reviewers in NLP are sometimes not very good, and there are going to be some cases. I've had cases in the past where there was just literally nothing to, no action items, nothing that I could do to improve the paper, and I just submitted it as is, and it was accepted for the next conference. So yeah, it's different on a case-to-case basis. Yeah, I'm just going to go over the questions one by one. Yeah, so any tips on how to get published in top journals? I wish I had. I guess, yeah, try to choose important problems. Try to, I think in journals it's easier because sometimes you have like at least I know in NLP, you have like a rolling review, so you can, rolling submission deadline, so you don't have to submit in a specific date, so you can take time to make the work better before you submit it for the next deadline. Um, Other than that, I don't really know what to say. It's there's yeah, I don't know. Like, do good work is not a really good tip, I guess. Um, let's see what else. How to create a good relationship with the supervisors. Are there patterns that we should be more careful? Uh, that's a good question. I think it's probably important before you start to maybe talk with the previous students or current students and figure out if there are any issues. Because sometimes people choose advisors just based on like who's successful in the field, and that's, I think, much less important than knowing that you can work with that person and that you can get along at the personal level, because you will be working with that person for a few years. So you need to figure that out before you start. Once you start, even the best advisors have their issues. So you got to learn to deal with them. Like I really have nothing bad to say about my PhD advisor. He's really great, and he keeps helping me in my as my career advances. But like one thing I learned about him during the PhD is that um, he takes the time. Like if I want to discuss a topic with him, then I should. He really works very differently than me. Like I could bring up some topic and then he dives deep into the smallest details, and then there's no time to talk about anything else. So I just learned to work around that. So if I have a few questions, then I would just start with the most important one, and I would take into account that maybe we're not going to have time during this meeting to discuss all the other things. You're going to have to learn to work around other people's work style. And also, again, I think the thing I said about getting feedback is, I think that's in general probably true for all the advisors, that you need to try not to be defensive. Just accept the feedback and say thank you, and then take some time offline to go over it and decide which of these comments you're going to implement and which you aren't going to. Do you think it's worth to do a PhD for those who don't want to stay in academia? I think that's a very personal question. I knew I wanted to stay, so for me that wasn't a question. I think you should look into the jobs that you will be interested in doing and see whether they require a PhD. I know that if you want to do research in industry, in NLP or in other machine learning areas, I think many companies do require a PhD. I know my brother has a master's in, he worked on computer vision, and he was looking into research positions, and many of them required a PhD. So you might have to compromise on the type of job that you take. But again, it's completely depending on the type of job that you want to do. And also if it is worth it, if your second best job that you can get without a PhD is good enough, then maybe you should do that, because just doing that for the sake of a small difference between the jobs that you could be doing may not be worth it, because it's a few years of your life, and it is a compromise in many ways. For example, financially, it is a compromise. You're not going to earn the same amount of money that you would in industry in that time. So it should be a personal question. There's no yes/no answer for that. What are the skill sets you're looking for in an aspiring PhD student? I guess I should come up with an answer for that, because people asked me that recently several times. I think it's really like, I just want to evaluate everyone separately. I don't have like a fixed list. I do think it is important to be technically strong, and also to just to want to work on the things that I'm interested at. In general, I have a pretty broad research interest, but I don't want to. I want to work with people that care about the same topics. I think that would be a good match. How to find the right mentors and advisors? That's a hard question. I'm not sure I know. I feel like I was just lucky to find them. I don't know if I have any. So I didn't mention that, but the way that I started was I did all my degrees in the same university, Bar-Ilan University. and I just took an NLP course in the last year of undergrad, and I decided to stay for a master's, and then I decided to stay for a PhD, and I just so the professor that taught the NLP course, Ido Dagan, I just asked him whether I could be his master's student, and then he took the chance on me, and I just stayed with him for a PhD. And so I had for me, I feel like it was mostly luck. But I think you should probably, if you are looking for a PhD position now, then you should probably just apply broadly and try to talk with a few, like with one or more potential advisors everywhere, and try to just get the gut feeling from your meeting with them, whether it's going to be right for you to work with them, and also ask previous students. I guess that's helpful, because sometimes there are some stories that you don't know about. Okay. Okay, so someone asked, I face the issue in every study I'm part of. I limit the scope of the study at the time of framing the research objective, but once I start working on the methodology, each objective branches into many more sub-objectives, or each method branches into multiple smaller methods. This usually happens when I try to work on the problem by considering multiple perspectives. This leads to the addition of too many elements in the paper, making the study less focused, and also confuses the reader. Any tips to work around this? Okay, that's a good question. So I think you actually have a good problem to have, because I think for most students, and for me also, when I was a student, my problem was the opposite, that I kept asking very focused questions, and my advisor kept telling me, if you want to stay in academia, you have to keep asking, you have to start asking, looking at the, like to have a longer term vision, and to ask the more difficult questions. I think it's good that you have this vision, that you know you're working on harder problems. And I think that once you start, you can just break it into multiple publications. So try to just frame the smaller problems as a research question worth asking and publishing. And I mean, you could still in the paper say, I'm working on this broader goal, but this paper specifically focuses on this sub-element of that goal, and publish smaller goals. I think it's also, it makes for better papers usually when they're focused on a specific topic. Yeah, and I think that was the last question here, but if someone has another question they want to ask.
There's one more.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Where is that? Oh, okay. Do you think for a PhD student to be successful, it matters the institutions, top ones, or more it matters the area and your supervisor? Okay, so it would be naive to say that it doesn't matter which institute, but I can say for myself that I think usually, I think in the field you would say, well, there are some top schools, most of them are in the US, and you have to do your PhD there to succeed. So I want to say you don't have to, because I did my PhD in Israel in a very good NLP group, because I think the group at Bar-Ilan is one of the best groups outside the US. But again, I didn't do that. It's not a top school. It's not even I don't think it's even the top school in Israel. It's like in computer science, it's like not even the third, I think. But it was like it's good to work with someone who is known in the field, and you could still succeed. If you want to stay in academia, you probably will want to do a postdoc, like I'm doing now. I think that really increased my chances to get a job. And it is possible. It's probably going to be harder, but it is possible. You don't have to go to a top school.
Okay, there are no more questions, but I have one question related to one of the questions were asked early. So when you work on your PhD, you target a specific problem. Is it better to look at this problem from different perspectives and try to publish in these different perspectives, or to look at your problem from one perspective and every time you publish a paper, you try to improve the paper in that perspective? What do you think is the best for your career?
I think I don't know if it matters really. I think it just, whatever makes you publish, like for the second one, it's more risky in terms of like, you could have very incremental papers. And I do think you need to avoid incremental papers. But I mean, I think depending on your career goal, if you want to, I think like for working in industry, it might be useful to be able to stick to a specific method and then try to improve it, because the goal in industry is for things to work, to work well. For an academic career, maybe it's going to be looked at less, like, I don't know. I'm just trying to hypothesize. I'm not sure it really matters, but I would say maybe try to avoid doing incremental work. And then you could just work on like similar tasks in the same area, or different aspects of the same problem, or different approaches for the same problem, or just try to mix both of them. Probably doesn't really matter.
Okay. Okay. Thanks so much for the talk. It was very, very useful and full of information. Thanks for sharing a lot of your stories. And I think that was inspirational in a way. So thank you so much. And everyone is happy and they just say thank you on the chat. So yeah, thanks again.
Thank you very much. And thanks everyone for attending.
Congratulations for the new job, and good luck.
Thank you very much. Good luck to everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.